This is our Cybersecurity Today month-end in review panel. We have Daina Proctor with us from Ottawa, correct?
Pleasure.
We have a new guest, Randy Rose from the Center for Internet Security, and Randy is from Saratoga Springs. Doesn't that sound nice this time? Saratoga Springs, New York. Welcome.
Thank you.
And the old familiar, we got David Shipley, the old familiar. No? Yeah, we got David Shipley. He's always here. We've got David Shipley from Fredericton. And David, by the way, has started doing the Monday morning Cybersecurity Today newscast. And it's been a while since I've just been able to wake up on Monday morning and listen in. What a treat. And we have me, Jim Love, from the heart of Haliburton County, the heart of the ice storm. We don't have power here yet. We're hoping any day now.
That's crazy, Jim. That's horrible.
Yep. Yeah. So this is our month in review show. And if all of the people in the audience know this, we bring some stories and we talk about them and try and find some insights into them. And generally, it's a good opportunity for us to get together and share information as well. And as you were saying, Dana, just before we went on air for this, was pretty easy pickings. There's not easy pickings. There's a lot of opportunity out there for stories that you will go, oh, wow. So shall we start?
Let's go.
Okay, David, you brought the first one, and this was Oracle. I'll let you lead with this one. This was fantastic. We'll start with a little bit of humor here.
Gather around the fireplace, kids, for stories of how not to do incident communications. Listen, breaches happen. They happen even to the big kids. Microsoft's been hit. Security companies have been hit. People get hit. It's important to be honest when it happens, because the speculation, the rumor mill, the registrar savage headlines on the reg, they're just not worth dancing around. I know we live in the era where we call ransomware an unauthorized penetration test that our backups failed to respond to, or some other bureaucratic speech. But man, now we're at the point where Oracle Cloud wasn't hacked. It was Oracle Cloud Classic. Like Coca-Cola gets away with the Coca-Cola and the Coca-Cola Classic. Come on.
Now, this is a long intro here, Dave. Story is a group said that they'd hacked Oracle. Oracle denied it. The group said, hold my beer. And they sent to Bleeping Computer, I think it was, here's how you can get on and see a message on the Oracle server. I'm going to go put one there for you now. And they went, whoa. Now, Oracle, being the transparent organization they said, was, no, this isn't happening. And then I think the whole story broke, and it is quite obvious that something happened there.
And let's be clear, at this point, I feel like Sesame Street, which is still on the air despite cuts that are coming to NPR and other things in the United States, I feel like the count, it's not one breach, it's two breaches. Because it's Oracle Cloud Classic, and privately, some of their healthcare clients are getting notifications. So this thing is just metastasizing. And what's hilarious is, so they say we weren't hacked. Then the hacker goes, hold my beer. Then they say it was Oracle Cloud Classic, and it's only stuff from 2017. And the hacker goes, here's some records from 2024. So it's, guys, stop the bleeding. And if we're going to use memes as visualization, there's this classic scene from The Simpsons where the kid is crying. He's like, stop hitting him. He's already dead. I'm starting to feel bad for you guys now. I've gone on this whole emotional journey where I was like, oh my God, you've been breached, to, I can't believe you're not communicating it, to, oh, everyone's just, including myself, we're just part of this train now of, what are you doing?
So Dana knows what's happening here, Randy, but David's also our culture critic.
Sounds like it.
But the issue comes up, and it comes up again, and I'm almost been wondering whether I'm too cynical, or sometimes I come across, because I get these things in stories where I read corporate communication and I just start calling it the blah, 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 blah. It's maybe we can get by with that in companies, but in cybersecurity, if you're not candid, I know it hurts, but if you're not candid and open, you're going to have more pain in the long run than you do by just putting this out. I still remember the big hacks that have happened where people have come straight out and said, we got hacked. It happens. We're looking at it. We're dealing with it. We'll give you as much information as we know. And that happens. And those companies come back.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on such a great point there. And I think any of us that do any type of simulation will be talking about a good holding statement. A good holding statement doesn't involve smoke and mirrors. A good holding statement doesn't involve inaccurate information. If you don't know, don't say. But yeah, incident management 101, to your point, David. Don't say things that aren't true, and work with your comms team on a better holding statement. And if you don't know, don't say anything until you do. I'd lean this out into 1, 2, 3 and me. A lot of their bankruptcy is certainly being attributed to the breach that they had and the privacy concerns. I know we can talk more on that because this was a softball of a month to pick which ones to review, Jim. But
Yeah.
very much breaches do have a way of bringing our businesses, if not our future trajectory, down significantly.
Yeah. And Randy, what about when you're advising clients and when your organization is talking to people? And you could just to introduce Randy, you works for the Center for Internet Security, and it deals with a lot of not-for-profits, but I guess agencies and public sector organizations in the U.S. And they're obviously, when we met the first time, we were talking about the school hack.
Oh, you're talking about Power School. Yeah, the Power School
Yeah.
breach.
A lot of schools had to come up and get information out to say, by the way, your kids' information is out there. That can't be pleasant.
No, I think Dana hit on a really good point, which is the communications piece of it. Really, at the end of the day, there's two issues here with Oracle, right? There's the data breach, right? So there's obviously some controls concerns, right? They didn't have proper controls in place, and that led to a breach. And that's one issue because you're dealing with a breach of data. And the whole other issue is how you communicate about it. And the irony is not lost on me that as an IT organization, your role is communications, right? That's what you do. You provide communications. It's digital communications, but it's communications no less. And then you fail miserably at communicating what's actually going on in the organization. I think these are two wildly different skill sets, but they're inextricably linked together. When there's a breach, you have to be able to communicate about it. And I love that the U.S. Navy aviation community has a wonderful 3-step crisis action plan, which is aviate, navigate, communicate. And you think about the kind of crises they deal with, they are in planes, right? They're flying aircraft. When they have a crisis, you're talking about a threat to life and safety. So their number one concern is keeping the plane in the air, aviate, right? Their second concern is where am I and where am I going and can I get there? So that's the navigate piece. And it's only after they know I can keep the plane in the air and I have an idea where I am, like am I in enemy territory or not? Can I get back to the aircraft carrier or not? Or can I land this thing safely? Only after they figure those things out do they communicate what's going on. And I think that's something that we fail in cyber to simplify our processes, right? When there's a breach, understand what it is, what's going on, who's impacted, how do we resolve that issue? And then when we have those key pieces, we don't have to know everything, but we just need to know the key pieces to communicate effectively. And I think it's something that some organizations do really well, and a lot of organizations just fail miserably.
And I think when it comes to that, it's always dangerous in this business to live in our digital houses and throw our rocks and realize that our house is made of glass as well. And my criticism is not that a large global provider got breached. Man, this is hard. It happens. I think my criticism is that I'm becoming deeply concerned their ability to do exactly what you just said, Randy, is I don't think they can fly the plane. I don't think they know what's going on. And that, to me, I think could be more damaging than just, yep, something's happening, we're investigating it, more details to follow, and communicating clearly to what Daina was saying. But the almost circus show, and I've had just about enough I can handle of clown and circus shows right now for a lifetime. I don't need to see this in the IT world. Politics has got the market cornered.
Yeah, it is disheartening, isn't it, that how they've responded to it and how they've repeatedly doubled down has been more disturbing. And it does then speak to your point, Randy, of did they have the controls? Were they aware? Are they flying the proverbial plane? And that's a concerning aspect. And I think a lot of our trust in the Oracle brand has been corroded because of their behaviors.
When you lose trust, you lose everything in a company. And yet some companies, like I said, come back and they build that trust.
The irony of a breach is, and even like things that were not cyber attacks, but were IT incidents, so CrowdStrike, if you show that you've learned from it, I actually had a number of people who were like, yeah, we renewed our contract with CrowdStrike, or we became a CrowdStrike customer because they've clearly learned their lesson. And So you can actually rebuild trust through an incident. It's not ideal. It's not the great way to do it, but you can. But there's a way to do it. There's a way not to do it. Yeah.
Speaking of denial, making people dig deeper, I did a story on the Signal group chat this month, and the basis of that was a number of people in the U.S. government were communicating using what they thought was an encrypted app. And I didn't make this a political story. It was a practical story for what we think. And that is, oh, we're on Signal. That's fine. We've got an encrypted communication there. Yeah, only you got to make sure you don't invite the wrong people to that, or that people can't get control of your phone, because it's great to have an encrypted app, but how do you hear the words and see the words in English for you? Your phone can decrypt this information. But so anybody in that chat can hear everything. Now, so we went to that first piece of it, and then absolute denial. This was not confident. Talk about another communication error. This was not highly secure information. Why? Because I'm the Secretary of Defense and I say what's classified and what's not. This is not classified. And everybody goes, that's semantics. We all know. So people dig deeper to the story. And of course, they dug deeper, and there have been at least 20 Signal group chats that they've held around the world on various things. And by the way, while they're traveling, and how do I know that? Because one of the people from that call, the famous call, was in Moscow at the time. And if you tell me you're carrying a phone in Moscow and it's not been intercepted or been hacked, then I'm going to tell you, you don't know what you're thinking. There's no way that a device wanders around the city of Moscow with all of those cybersecurity experts that Moscow has, and they don't break that device. I find that impossible. And by the way, we all know they're miking your hotel room and all of that sort of thing too. But anyway, that's the political story, but not the politics of it. It's this idea of we fall in love with an app or some process that we've got, and then we stop thinking about all of the things that go around it. Did anybody else find that sort of insight to that story?
A couple of things that I want to highlight to NIST. Identity and access management's hard, man. I can't help myself, but like literally this is Maslow's hierarchy of cybersecurity needs, right? Who you add into what? Secondly, shadow IT is such a huge thing. And one of the stories that got lost in the politics of this was how many people had raised red flags about Signal in particular on government devices and were overruled by political appointees. And the lesson for leaders listening to this is when your people are raising genuine concerns about insecure methods of communication that you should probably not do, convenience versus security or legality. I think lastly, as a former journalist, I totally get why these actors decided to use non-government record-keeping systems. They were pain, and you don't want necessarily every conversation to be recorded and then used in a court of law when someone's potentially looking at war crimes. I get where they're at. But yeah, does that add up? Don't know. It's those things that are interesting. And by the way, this isn't just government, right? How many banks have been fined by global regulators for people using WhatsApp to conduct business and transactions that are supposed to be in systems of records, like hundreds of millions of dollars? So like we're all tee-heeing at government and all that fun stuff, and it's political, but it ain't the only group of cats using unsanctioned, quote unquote, secure communication systems to do business. And you're kidding yourself if you don't think that this is happening all over the place to get around access to information, regulations, and other things.
Yeah, there's a challenge too, I think, in this particular case, and I know this is the case in a number of Western countries that deal with classified information. There's essentially two sets of rules, right? There's the classification level of the data. So that's determined by, here in the US, we use something called an OCA, an Original Classification Authority. And there are guides that the OCA follows to say, like, this level of information combined with this other piece of information, make it this level of classification with these information controls in place, right? These dissemination controls, all of those kinds of things. And that's determined by an OCA. And then there's a second piece of the information. So you have the data classification piece, and the second piece is need to know. So you need to have a clearance of the right level to gain access to that data by default. And then you need to have a need to know. So when you talk about a chat that ends up in a situation where a person who does not necessarily have a need to know, let alone doesn't have the proper clearance, and you're taking information that you would require a certain level of system, a certain secure system in order to transmit that data, you're taking that data off and putting it into that other environment. I understand like some of the officials are saying this wasn't classified, or had we determined that it was unclassified data was able to be transmitted. You're still at this point transmitting it to somebody who doesn't have a need to know. So even if the classification piece was resolved, you now have this other issue that hasn't really been addressed, which I think is, to David's point, goes to risks with not just shadow IT, but that whole identification and authorization piece of it. When you move something out of official IT channels, now you've lost control over who can get that, right? Now you're dealing with an information dissemination issue and potentially putting in the wrong kind of information into the hands of people who really don't have a need to know. And I would say in this particular case, a journalist definitely didn't have a need to know the kind of content that was being shared, which ultimately ended up, a lot of it being shared to the American public. That's very interesting. Other side to this, I don't think is really getting a lot of
And I
focus.
think that's where my mind went to it. And certainly in full agreement with you. But if I go to maybe more a human element, which I know in talking to you before, I often go there, is when my values are violated, I get really pissed off. And this pissed me off. That information should not have been shared with a journalist. It should not have been shared with the public. And to give that weak excuse and expect that we should have, one, believed the excuse, and two, accepted the excuse, just made me more pissed off. So in the whole situation, it was and I think it ties in well with the Oracle as well, is our society is wonderfully connected. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't still be following the golden rule of being honest and being truthful. And if you don't have something nice to say, keep your mouth shut. The telling me that it was okay that this journalist was in that chat and the information being shared was public anyways, really was just an offense on my intelligence or my acceptable aspects. And the interesting thing is, in a community conversation wandering through the grocery aisle, that was one of the comments. They said, oh, just be careful what friends you keep in your contacts for WhatsApp, because if they get added, that's the problem. And I said, hold on, that's how it ended up being transacted. But the problem was that they were actually having that conversation on Signal.
You can get to this thing of, we can blame the devices, we can blame the failure, we can blame all these sorts of things, but you have to look back with common sense and say, should I be talking about this here? And if anybody ever stands in elevators behind people or in restaurants, and you have to ask yourself, should you be having that conversation here? It happens all over the place. The denial just makes it worse.
It's funny, like you mentioned it, but we're talking about Signal, but there are 4 coffee shops in downtown Toronto where if I want to be in the loop about major financial transactions, one of them will generally have something pretty interesting to say. So if you stand at the Starbucks and you pretend you have your headphones in, but you're just being nosy as all get out, you learn a ton. It's fantastic. The Signal chat is the example in this case, but to your point about where and when it's appropriate to have what conversations. I guess the good news of this is the big winner of this whole mess was Hillary Clinton, because, I mean, her social media posts were on fire, right? I mean, that LinkedIn post where it was like, are you kidding me with the eye emoji? Look, there was some good emoji use in that chat, but that was something else, right? So I guess winners and losers on that one. But in all seriousness, if you think that this isn't happening in some fashion within your organization, you're kidding yourself. And then the question is, how do you create the norms and the culture where people don't do it? Because there's no technological. If the US government, with the full might of the NSA, cannot prevent senior leaders from doing this, there's no technological way to do it. You got to have the buy-in to do it. To Daina's point, people got to believe in doing the right thing.
Yeah, Dave, I might challenge you on the winner, though. I think Signal itself, it probably comes out as the winner.
Fair
I
point.
think as we progress as a society, I think we're going to start to see more and more use of encrypted messaging apps. And I don't think Signal could have paid to have the promotion that they got through this entire thing. Every media outlet on the planet was writing about this. Signal was created by Moxie Marlinspike, who's a well-known entity in the hacking community. And I think that guy is laughing all the way to the bank because I think more and more people are signing up for Signal today than a few weeks ago.
And they did have the best micro release note I've ever seen and some spicy posts from Moxie. So I will concede the point, Randy. I do agree. Hillary's going to have to come in second place yet again.
Burn.
But again, without being political, there's a leadership piece to this that I think we have to learn from. And I remember when iPads were first coming into the office, when we had no idea how to secure them, and the CEO would bring one in, wander it in, but nobody else could do that. Leadership matters. And the tone, we say that old tired phrase, the tone from the top. If you want to have a secure organization, you had best not overrule your security people all the time and say, but it's okay for me, but not for the great unwashed. Because the great unwashed learns from you. They know what's happening. They know what's important. And that's every CISO out there has got to be saying, when you set that type of example, this is what happens to you.
Yeah, touche.
Now, on the positive side, speaking of examples,
There's a positive side?
there is a positive side, not to this story. There's besides Signal being the number one ad. But I saw the UK government take a really nice leadership role globally in new legislation being proposed to actually extend critical infrastructure cybersecurity. So this is the extension of the European NIS2. And what was really awesome was they were specifically targeting data centers, MSPs, like the actual value chain of which their modern digital economy depends on, which is so nice to see because as we talk about the month that was, of course, C26 went down in flames because of a typo. And of course, the political survival of the Liberal Party here in Canada required us to prorogue Parliament. There had been the faintest and most hopey of hopes that somehow they would come back, do a speech from the throne before pulling the trigger on an election, and we might have got it passed, but nope, it's just not to be. And so Canada is now 3+ years out easily from any kind of modern cybersecurity laws. And I'm sure Daina is as frustrated as I am because we both spent valuable time just to Parliament to actually have basic laws that cover some of our economy. C26, RIP,
For those vacationing off planet, C26 was?
the Canadian Critical Cybersecurity Act, which included amendments to the Telecommunications Act, which actually ironically gave the government the authority to force our telcos to get rid of Huawei, which they currently don't say they don't have, but that could be gray, along with mandatory requirements for cybersecurity for energy transmission, telecommunications, transportation, and the finance sector.
And Daina, you were just as passionate about this and working actually actively on trying to get this across the finish line as well.
Yeah. And the challenge that was seen for so long was we were waiting for perfection to move forward. It came to the Senate at the 11th hour before Senate went for the summer break. They did very quickly come through with it. But the challenge that I've got right now is, to your point, David, we have no regulation. We have nothing guiding. So when if we look at the month in review, one of the items that I was looking at getting ready for today is I had to smile. The launch of that, and I have to read it because there's so many words in it. The Cybersecurity Certification Program, released as a new cybersecurity standard and self-assessment tool for level 1 of 4 levels, specifically made for by the Standard Council of Canada, will start accepting applications for organizations who want to become certification bodies to support the evaluation and certification. So we've created all of this government bureaucracy for 4 levels of certification for defense and supply chain, but we still can't get regulations or bills through to say what our telecommunications or our nuclear power plants or our other critical infrastructure should be required to do on behalf of Canadians.
Yeah, and the problem, again, leadership. It shows how much you care. If this was really something urgent, they could have fixed it.
They had 2.5 years.
It's just another, what's privacy and security? Who cares? And again, that sends a message not just to citizens, that sends a message to staff. That sends a message to everybody that this stuff isn't really that important in terms of how you're doing your job. That's scary.
That's it. That's it.
I want to go back to a point Dave made about the UK bill that I think is probably lost on a lot of people. So the focus on the data centers and the MSPs, the managed service providers, is really critical for smaller organizations. So when we think of data centers, right, we think of the large behemoth organizations, but who are they actually servicing? Their customers on the whole are very small organizations. There's a lot of them, and they don't have the ability to run their own internal data center. That's why they use these large data centers. Same thing with the managed service providers. In the US, and I suspect this is the case for a lot of countries, the smaller the organization, whether it's a small business, a nonprofit, or a local government, they don't have the resources in-house to run a lot of the IT and cybersecurity infrastructure themselves. So they have to outsource it. And in most cases, at least here in New York, one of the things that we see, and actually really all of New England, so the whole eastern part of the US, we see managed service providers are often relatively small organizations themselves. So they're regionally aligned. There might be an organization based out of here, like the New York capital region, and it provides services to maybe 60 organizations in the local area. And then just outside of their local area, there's a different managed service provider. So having regulations that support those organizations is one of the best ways to get to, I'll call it the extremities, right? Get out to those organizations that are traditionally really hard to get to. Because even if you have a federal regulation that says, we're going to mandate all organizations do this thing, there's just a massive amount of organizations that have no resources to do that thing, whatever that thing is, right? So they're relying on those outside providers. So the more we can do to support those managed service providers, data centers, and other third-party organizations that actually have the resources, the better off everybody is. So that's what I really like about this UK bill.
Yeah. But it also establishes a standard for MSPs. And there used to be this in the days when there were Christmas ads and things like that, there used to be this ad that said, "Open me first." And I think that's what people think of MSPs. Open me first. You've got all kinds of clients and I can reach you. And I don't think in many cases, I don't think MSPs are always taking that as seriously. I'm not saying they all do, but I'm saying there's so many hacks of MSPs that come up week after week. And at least setting a standard that says there's a regulation, you're going to pay a fine if you don't do this. I ran a small tech company for a while. We got out of hosting. One of the reasons we got out of hosting, we weren't going to be as good enough at security as so I could sleep at night. It was just that. Turn it over to somebody who's going to actually do this better. And that's a huge piece. But I think a lot of MSPs don't know what they don't know. I read a couple forums because I'm still interested in that area. And you read who some of the people are that are supplying a lot of small organizations. And you go, you really don't know what you're doing. And
It's a little bit of a lost leader in business. And I think that's the challenge there as well, is to do it economically. The value point just can't be that robust. I'm a little jaded around the standards that they've brought about, though. I lived through, what was it? It was years ago. It was called Cyber Essentials, wasn't it? And I'm sorry, I'm giving you all goosebumps right now going,
I
you
remember
got the willies.
Yeah.
Wasn't it a similar program where it was to be part of a supply chain in the UK, your company need to align to a certain level of controls, and you were certified up to an essentials or whatever the next level was, and it died a horrid death. And we tried to do it in Canada.
Yeah, it was more successful in the UK by orders of magnitude because in Canada, we spent millions, tens of millions of dollars on Canada's version of Cyber Essentials, but we didn't remember what the UK did that actually made people want to do it, which was you couldn't get a government RFP if you didn't have the basic bare minimum. No, in Canada, it was like, we think this is a nice thing to do. And 12 organizations across the country, like 12. Value for dollar, not there. Do I think that we need a basic set of fire code for some standards? Yes. What's different about this defense one that you're mentioning is that, and this is interesting, is we were rushing to match the US, and Randy, you might have to help me here, but there's a US DOD, we want to say CMMC standard that came out. God help me, I can't remember what it actually stands for. But we, of course, being Canadians, we're like, we have to make our own version that has to be then given equivalency so that our suppliers can supply the US defense industrial complex. But in one of those life's greatest ironies, it turns out we may not be able to supply the defense industrial complex of the United States. So this entire certification has become kind of Don Quixote charging at the windmill because we can't even sell aluminum and steel to the United States. I don't know if I'm right about that, Randy, about CMMC, or if I'm on the right.
Yeah. No, so CMMC was the cyber maturity model certification. And that one is focused specifically on what we call the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. So it's all the contract organizations that, like outside contractors that provide services to the federal government. But you're right. It's a framework for kind of effectively what you just said. And I actually wasn't, I had to Google that cybersecurity or cyber essentials in the UK because I wasn't tracking that, but it looks like that was a National Cybersecurity Center initiative that did have a forcing function, which essentially CMMC is the same. If you're going to work with the federal government, you have to meet a certain requirement to handle controlled and classified information or federal contract information. That was like a big part of what CMMC is. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's actually, it either already did undergo a major update or it is undergoing an update, CMMC 2.
Yeah. You can comply with CMMC 2 or you can use Signal.
Yes. So those are your options.
Pretty, Dana, you were going to say something.
No, we end up with bureaucracy and acronyms instead of actual security. Security right now, people aren't choosing to not implement multi-factor authentication, segmentation, identity controls because they just don't want to. They're usually doing it because they don't have the money to or the people to. This type of certificate, but it's technology in some ways is sometimes the cheapest part. So that's where I'm struggling with some of these programs. And I had forgotten the Cyber Essentials success was because it had some teeth to it. I wasn't aware there was only 12 in Canada. That's horrific. So I'm optimistic if we're creating this new standard that's assisting, that it would bring some semblance of improving the waterline for our defense contracts, engaging with corporations that only meet that. The challenge is that is going to be a tax tariff on those companies. They're going to have to meet that certification and maintain it. And that's hard to do in an industry where we're already seen as a tax instead of as an amplifier.
And we're still in a place, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Canada, we're still in a place where most small businesses are just not even vaguely protected, not even going through the motions of anything resembling security, let alone when it gets complex. And without that, not only are those businesses in jeopardy, but any customers they work with are in jeopardy. And I keep looking at this. Every time I look at a new story that comes out of I'll just lead into this. There's a whole story about EDR bypasses this month. And I found 3 stories. We did them one after another. Microsoft's Defender, there's an open out, and Microsoft acknowledges it. It's out there bypassing that. There are 3 or 4 or 5 tools floating around right now that use software that is basically software that won't trigger anything in an EDR because it's built like a regular piece of software, or it is legitimate software, but it's been hacked or bypassed. And those are just some of the things that are happening. And my favorite of all of these things, using old certificates. This is how clever these guys are, using old certificates that have expired, but spinning back the clock on the machine you attack.
Yeah.
So it looks like the certificate is real. I can go through these, and we did stories on them. You can read them all, and I'll put some links in the show notes if people want to follow some of these. But the fact is, that's the level of sophistication that's going out there attacking the one thing that small business might actually have, and that's endpoint detection. And so this is a problem, I think, a universal problem, and one that's just doesn't seem to ever go away.
Yeah, I might challenge you a little bit on the one defense mechanism that small businesses will have is EDR. I think, at least the organizations I've seen, they might have host-based detection in the form of antivirus, but antivirus and EDR, 2 totally different things, and one being signature-based and one being more behavioral-based. But one of the articles that you sent my way was the Forbes article where it talks about an FBI alert. I'm happy to say a little bit of self-promotion here. My team, the security advisory that went out that was joint between DHS, FBI, and my team at the MSI Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, we focused on Beauceron ransomware. And we did a lot of the technical analysis behind that report. And you're absolutely right. These are things, EDR bypass isn't really brand new, but some of the techniques that we're seeing are actually pretty novel and interesting. Turning back the clock was a relatively new one. And the other thing you mentioned too is the living off the land binaries or LOL bins. We're seeing more and more actors doing that. Medusa is one of them. We've had, I think the number is 7 Inc. ransomware. That's INC ransomware cases just this year. Same kind of thing. A lot of living off the land, using things like PS exec and other PowerShell capabilities to use administrative tools that are inherent on a system so that they don't have to install their own malware, right? It helps evade detection. And so one of the challenges is, even if you have EDR, but that EDR isn't properly tuned to your environment, you might miss some of those living off the land techniques, because how EDR should work is identifying things that are outside of the normal behavior on that system. So if a user has never used PowerShell before and all of a sudden PowerShell is being invoked, EDR should catch that. Or PowerShell is being invoked to run specific commands, EDR should catch that. And sometimes that's not the case because EDR is installed, but it's not actually been through the proper process to tune itself to the network and to the hosts in that network. So that's one of the challenges sometimes we have with, even if there is EDR, even if there is a security tool in place, it's not properly tuned to the environment. And that alone, I think that gets back to Daina's point earlier. It's not always necessarily the tool. You might have the tool in place, but the more expensive thing is configuring it for the environment, making sure that it's adequately tested, running in a secure configuration, all of those things.
There was another thing I saw in one of the articles, and just was, they hadn't set up the EDR right. They had it, but it was set up, or it was bypassed by something, or that it disabled it. But basically it would give an alarm, but not do any protecting. Oops.
And isn't that the fun, right? The old adage of set and forget, right? We've got EDR, check, we're good. And to your point, a lot of the small, medium businesses, even enterprise businesses, we get focused on other activities. We're forgetting some of those golden rules of we need to be testing. We need to be actually running some semblance of penetration testing at some point, or even purple teaming with your monitoring organization to ensure that you're actually testing valid use cases. You're looking at your rights and your administrations, right? Doing some certification campaigns within an organization is pretty foundational for most of us. I don't know an actual percentage. I'm sure ChatGPT, another GPT could tell me a number, but I suspect if I was to put a bet on it, it's less than 10% of our organizations actually do that and do it on the regular. So these types of stories, I hope, act as reminders of, oh yeah, I should go check that and make sure that my EDR is actually picking up PowerShell run, for example, as you mentioned, Randy.
I think, Daina, you're 100% correct. And Randy, the same thing. You got to tune these things. What I'm desperately afraid of, so many vendors are sprinkling AI magic pixie dust and saying it does it all for you, which, dear listeners and viewers, like a natural human tendency is where we don't want to do extra work. We're busy, we're tired, we're cranky, we got enough on the plate, whatever it is. And so when we hear vendors say that sweet siren song of it's automated, smart, intelligent, you don't have to, you can set it and away you go. It is the disaster of the sirens, right? For those who use naval references or mythological naval references, right? So the sirens would lure you in and your ship would crash to the rocks and you'd be devoured by monsters. Here ended the lesson on EDR and the vendors that say you don't have to do anything, you just got to install it. And the other part is, of course, we buy into the idea of the silver bullet still. And silver bullet thinking is all throughout information technology, whether it's customer relationship management or other systems or security systems. We keep falling for the same trap. It's like the Wile E. Coyote and technology is our Acme Corp, and we have a very unhealthy relationship with it. And hopefully that movie will be coming out soon now that it's been released from Warner Brothers. Hell, fingers crossed.
That's a news article we didn't talk about yet.
Part 2.
Does anybody else have another story? You want to cover it? Daina, do anything?
Getting ready to, like I said, it was a bit of a softball month because there were just so many really great articles. And so a few that caught my eye, I'll say, and in some ways made me shake my head because to your point that you'll often say, David, of catching the Dilbert, there were a few of them. One is the Kuala Lumpur International Airport, $10 million ransomware. In itself is not necessarily horrific, right? You're like, okay, another, to your point, airport got hacked, but the convergence of the OT with the IT. This, from what I've been able to read, was certainly very targeted. And the irony was not lost on me that their flight information dashboards was what predominantly was what was seen by travelers. So they had whiteboards, if I believe the articles that we're reading, and we will get whiteboards in the Kuala Lumpur International Airport, not a small airport, for quite a bit of time. So public disclosure of the public impact, no flight challenge, but it begs the how far can they go? Airports are now being seen as I can get some attention with these, and airports are wonderful little cities. There's a lot of financial gain. What I love as well is that they said, no, we're not paying the ransomware. So a neat story, not close to home, but I dare say could be. On the other side of it was the NHS Scotland. And you could interchange NHS Scotland with any local hospital. Major ransomware attack, knocked out most clinical systems. Staff was left for, arguably, I think it was a day and a bit, pen and paper. Operations were canceled. Patient Claire wasn't able to go on. Entire systems were offline. If I'm believing what we're reading, no segmentation for offsite backups. They had legacy infrastructure that they blamed as the leading culprit. And no, they didn't seem to have any incident response plan. Outside of maybe some tabletops that they had done, they had not simulated this. So they were at an absolute inability on how do we actually respond. The Beetlejuice to this is it could have been one of our hospitals in a heartbeat. So those were the two that caught
This was
my
an
attention.
OT. You said this was an OT IT thing? I didn't catch the story.
So a bit of convergence there, that by getting into the flight information dashboards, you're going through what is more traditionally the OT side of the airports, of understanding when the airlines were planning to be departing and arriving and which gate they're at. That's often being either informed by OT or run by IT and then converged into the IT side of an airport. So it's absolutely targeting I would say, an Achilles heel of the airports.
Wow. And the NHS story, you said they came back in a day and a half? They actually get back that fast?
Back up, not using pen and paper, according to the article. Back up. I don't know that you catch up that quickly. I don't believe you're caught up that quick.
Even if they were perfect, a day and a half, I think we might class them in our other story being less than honest about what's happening. We had 5 hospitals here in Ontario that were attacked. They didn't come back for months.
In fairness, there's a famous political quote. It depends on the definition of is right. And it depends what you mean by open. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of leeway on that side. What's interesting with the NHS hacks, like a lot of these health trusts in the UK, it's been their managed service providers that get hit and then it takes them down, which goes back to Randy's point about what's nice about and probably honestly what's driving the UK focus. And it's, oh yeah, MSPs are critical infrastructure. The OT, IT thing, it's only going to continue to accelerate because we've turned networks into software and people have made a lot of good progress in efficiencies and scale and money to be made in doing that. But when you turn what used to be physically separate fiber networks into the same network that's then split by software, you're typos away from bad things happening. And OT devices continue to be a dumpster fire. Yeah. The one last shout out I want to give is, of course, kudos to police when they bust a criminal. But we have a Canadian that has now been charged for a hack of the Texas GOP. Apparently, according to reporting from the Globe and Mail, he was actually quite prominently featured in a documentary that's on Netflix about the founding of Anonymous. Police 1, OPSEC 0. With lessons to be learned. I think earlier this week, you kicked off the week and I said a couple of things. If you're going to hack, don't target Texas. Don't mess with Texas, one of the best environmental campaigns ever. But also do not taunt the FBI with foul language and tell them what they can and can't do, because you know what motivates a cop? Yeah, challenge me.
Right.
Yeah, he hacked around and found out.
Did you hear anything about that? Was that news in the States, Randy, at all?
I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know about the specific story of Cottle getting arrested. I don't remember seeing that until you passed it my way, but certainly the breach of the Texas Republican Party, that was years ago though. That was near the height of COVID, if I remember correctly. It was kind of like 2021 maybe. So I do, yeah, I mean, that made news for sure, but I don't think the arrest has really hit off
Okay.
here in the US. That's not
Of
really,
all
that
the,
kind of stuff doesn't always pick up. Like, we're interested in the sensational part, so the hack itself makes it into US news and we escalate that. But when they catch the guy, it's kind of, all right.
Yeah, the good news for this cat is he's apparently being charged under Canadian law, which means possibly Canadian jail time, and he's not going to end up in El Salvador. So that's a win.
I guess so. But the IT, and this is one of the things that I talk about. I'm actually trying to get together to do a police show but it's incredibly hard to get through the communications people to get police who will actually talk to you, because I honestly believe we don't know how hard the work is. This hack happened years ago, and God bless them in the US. The FBI have been the most dogged people for going after. And that's why I loved David's story saying, don't mess with the FBI. If you have that reputation, it may take us years, but we'll get you. That's the type of prevention you get. And I think in many cases, some other police forces, maybe some in Canada, could learn from that. And that is that you just don't let go. And so that if you're going to do, what's that, Beretta? You don't do the crime if you can't do the time. And I'm not your pound on the table law and order guy, but there is a special place in hell for people who hack hospitals and do things like that, or who cheat old people out of their pensions. And God bless the FBI on that one.
Here. If we try to leave a little bit of positivity on this, well, is one of the things that I'm loving is seeing the anti-money, anti-laundering activities being brought more in with the IT, not a little bit in the OT, because there's certainly some brick and mortar aspect to it as well, but the security program. Right? Years ago, we'd call it fusion. I think it's having its resurgence, and not the least of which of other stories that were in the news not so long ago, but one of TD Bank for the anti-money laundering. But certainly anti-money laundering, anti-fraud, cybersecurity, they're all close cousins, all very close cousins. So I'm loving that some of the programs are leaning more into how to be detecting, and then, of course, how to be thwarting, or at least being aware to detect sooner than later, and putting some stop to that. Because to your point, special place in hell for people that take advantage of seniors, people on fixed income, people on disability, people with special needs. You shouldn't take advantage of anybody, but especially not the weak.
That's great. The wonder of this is how fast the hour goes. I'm hoping I get you guys back again for another month, because I think we covered a lot on this one, but the time just zipped by on this one. So thank you very much. My guests have been Daina Proctor with us from Ottawa, Randy Rose from Saratoga Springs. Sorry, I got Syracuse on the brain. I can't help. Saratoga Springs, and David Shipley from beautiful Fredericton. And I'm your host, Jim Love. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening. If you have comments on the show, please send them to me at editorial@technewsday.ca. You can reach me there. You can find me on LinkedIn. A lot of people roast me there, and I'm just happy to have a non-political discussion on LinkedIn. So come to me and talk to me about cybersecurity. And if you're watching this on YouTube, right underneath the video, just leave a comment. We'll get back to you. Thanks a lot, gang, and we'll do this again next month.